Hey guys, Nathan here. Today I woke up, brushed my teeth, ate some cereal, and then checked Discord, and it turns out there was some news I missed last night. Apparently, there have been some leaks for the upcoming Path of Exile expansion, and they're very comprehensive. So today I thought it might be kind of a fun video to just go over them and speculate on how strong they're going to be, and just like generally give my first impressions on them because they're pretty nutty, for lack of a better way to put it. I do want to make one caveat here. They are leaks, and leaks can easily be faked, and leaks also can easily just be incorrect to an extent. And although I personally think these look like pretty real, or at least like very close to real, considering they're full of custom artwork and believable text and just all kinds of things that GGG would do, still take this video with a grain of salt. If anything, it's just sort of a fun video and some, free content for us to enjoy. So I'm going to take a look at these and let me know what you think in the comment section below. So first up, let's start with some of the less exciting news, and that is the nerfs. There's a few nerfs here today, and they are just to Slayer and Trickster. So Slayer, oh, it looks like Overwhelmed got nerfed just by 0.5%. I'm looking at the values right now on my second monitor, and it was just 8%, and now it's down to 7.5%. This is, I'm not going to lie, not the biggest deal in the world. And then even so, like the more I played Slayer and the more I messed with the Ascendancy and Path of Building, I started to realize it's just, pretty meta and easy to get like good weapons with high base critical strike chance anyway. So I didn't think this node really was all that compelling, especially in the absolute end game stages of gearing. So very tiny nerf right here, in my opinion. Next nerf, fairly simple, was 20% attack and movement speed after killing enemies from Bane of Legends, and now it's just 10%. So flat numbers nerf, kind of a shame because Slayer doesn't really have access to a lot of movement speed, so this kind of further hurts it in that regard. But it's probably just trying to nerf the overall momentum aspect of the Ascendancy that made it so strong, especially when paired with things like Inspired Learnings and Headhunters and Cyclone and all that nonsense. So yeah, not a huge nerf, but something. Next up, we have nerfs to Ghost Dance, and this is kind of upsetting to me because, as I'm sure most of you know, I'm a huge fan of playing my Tricksters, and it looks like they just made more flat numbers nerfs. Instead of a 5% chance to evade with Energy Shield, it's now down to 3% chance to evade. Instead of getting 3% reduced damage taken per Ghost Route, it's down to 2%, and instead of getting hit and recovering 5% of your evasion rating as Energy Shield, you now recover 4%. So these nerfs honestly hurt a lot, in my opinion, because I already chose to go mind over matter after the way they nerfed the sort of Ghost Dance escape artist way of building Trickster when I did my ED build, and I think this sort of further exacerbates the situation. And I wouldn't think it was a huge deal if I didn't see what Assassin has in store for us, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, I think they went a little bit overboard with these nerfs, and hate to see it. Okay, so next up we have the new notables. Now, there's actually a lot of notables. This is like not even half of them. Actually, this is about half of them, but as you can see here, a lot of them are just attached to the tree in very obvious ways. Other ones are sort of hanging out on their own, and this is just me speculating, but I'm guessing the ones that aren't attached to the tree are going to be the ones that are exclusive to anointed oils. So, yeah, anything that's like not attached to a tree here is probably going to be exclusive to interacting with Blight Leak. Otherwise, you can probably just build it into your tree. So first one here, we have Ravenous Horde. Absolutely insane, notable. Tons of movement speed for your minions, tons of damage, tons of attack and cast speed, and then a chance to gain Onslaught, which is another 20% movement speed, attack speed, cast speed. So yeah, Ravenous Horde, excellent name for a excellent node if you want any kind of minion build that feels good. Then we have Crusader, which is very interesting and unique. It's 8% increased maximum mana, and then increases and reductions to maximum mana also apply to your damage at 30% of their value. Basically trying to push this whole like mana stacking caster archetype thing that I think they've been trying to do for a while. The way Hierophant is built, the way like some mana nodes are implemented on the tree now, Indigon. I don't really think it's ever going to be a thing. At least not like in current Path of Exile, maybe 4.0 plus, but like they're definitely trying. That's what this node does. Then we have Golem Commander, which is bonus Golem here, and then some maximum life, some extra buffs, some extra damage. Yeah, but it's kind of interesting. They are still trying to push this thing from Golems where you want to buff yourself and take advantage of those buffs. which is kind of just not how I think most people want to play golems. But I mean, at least the increased effective buffs will work with carrion golem in a way that will further buff your other minions. But it's an additional golem, so you're going to just take this on any golem build. Really nice. Love to see it. Next, we have Tribal Fury, probably the most exciting node in this entire reveal for me. I know I'm kind of a nerd, but just 12% melee damage and strike skill, strike one additional nearby enemy. Woo! I don't know if this is actually going to make things like Heavy Strike feel good to play, but if it means dropping Ancestral Call, that's an entire extra link of damage. So this could be super fun to use. And it looks like you need to anoint it on your amulet, which is good in the sense that you don't have to like find it on the skill tree, but bad in the sense that you have to spend your amulet anointing on it. But I'm still really hyped for this. This looks really cool to me. Transcendent, minus physical damage taken from attack hits, and then minus physical damage taken from hits per level. I guess this is probably good if you already have a lot of mitigation, because I think this is applied at the end of the damage calculation. Don't quote me on it, but I think this is better than it looks, but still not super amazing. I'm sure somebody will see this and get excited over it, but I'm not that person. Aspect of the Stone, on the other hand, is nutty as fuck. 20% chance to avoid physical damage from hits. That's just avoidance. That's rolled separately from dodge, evasion, block. I mean, you could just basically say that's like 20%, chance to not take physical damage. That's probably the easiest way to sort of regurgitate that information there. Next up, we have Mystic Talents, which is 16% increased spell damage, some energy shield, some mana regen, and 30 int. It looks like that one is not attached to the skill tree in any way, so that's going to have to be an anointed one. Looks okay. Looks very catch-all, but not like stand out to me. I don't think anybody would really go out of their way to grab this one, considering all those stats are so readily available in different places. Arcane Capacitor, sorry. Actually, I think this is a very interesting node. This is further pushing that sort of Crusader archetype I was mentioning, where you stack mana to do damage, and that's basically you get increased effective Arcane Surge up to 50% just for spending shit tons of mana. I mean, you have to spend a lot of mana, but yeah, Arcane Surge is already usually going to be the #1 DPS increase for any self-cast build, and if you can afford to run it at higher levels rather than just like a level 6 linked with your Flame Dash or something, you can get insane DPS out of it. And then increasing the effect of that buff up to 50%. This is a very nutty node, and maybe I should take back what I said about mana stacking casters never being a thing. Next up, we have Searing Heat, top right-hand corner there. Damage overtime multiplier for Ignite from critical strikes. Okay. Increased critical strike chance from spells, and then critical strike multiplier against burning enemies. This is a lot of multipliers, so I guess this is for trying to facilitate the whole crit ignite, like making an ignite build, but also using perfect agony or something, so your multipliers apply to your ignites as well. That's what I'm reading off this. This node is probably going to make more sense to people who actually play ignite builds. Holy Fire, fire damage overtime multiplier, increased fire damage, chance to ignite. That looks like it's not attached to anything, or maybe it's part of a wheel, I can't tell. Seems pretty good. I guess that would apply to RF as well. So that's kind of interesting, but yeah, that looks solid thing to anoint on your amulet if you're an ignite build, maybe. Then there's Breath of Flames. That was okay. That has the new multiplier as well. That's fire damage overtime multiplier, fire damage, ignite duration enemies, and ignite. Again, I think you kind of always grab that little mini wheel in the middle of the fire, the big fire wheel if you're playing ignite builds. Then we have Way of the Warrior, which is increased armor, life, melee damage, strength. Not bad, but I put it in the same sort of group as Mystic Talents, as in sort of catch-all, nice, good and helpful, but like you can get those stats so many other places that you're probably going to look for something more unique and build-defining. Next up, we have Divine Judgment, which was, in my opinion, already kind of an underrated node. It's on the far left side, just to the left of the Templar start, and it now has 6% to fire damage overtime multiplier instead of 18% increased burning damage. So as you'll see, it's kind of a trend, adding these new damage overtime multipliers as a way to sort of compensate for how shitty dot builds tend to be, or at least bring them up to par with cold dots and chaos dots. Next up, we have Dirty Techniques, which is kind of interesting. It used to just be 40% increased damage, which is a pretty nice multiplier, but now they pulled it down, but made it the new damage overtime multiplier. So This is probably still going to be significantly better, but it kind of sucks to lose the 40%. Not that a lot of people were taking dirty techniques anyway. Bloodletting, huge buff to that, and that's also kind of the premier bleed wheel anyway, because it's positioned nicely to help people fill in the rest of their bleed chance. And then also now it gives this extra multiplier, and it already had this really cool reduced damage taken from bleeding enemies and dealing damage from bleeds faster. And increased damage from bleed. This is just, I mean, this was already a really good node for bleed builds, and now it's a very, very good node, auto include for bleed builds, I would argue. Dire Torment looks like a new node to me, and it's further pushing the whole, dealing damage with crits and then caring about the ailments after sort of archetype, aka perfect agony builds. So yeah, I'm sure you'll see this on some specific builds. Can't say I'm super excited for it, but it's not bad. Red Storm, this is kind of an interesting one for me because I always found this wheel to be a little bit out of the way, and based on the background there, it doesn't look like it's moved. But for some bleed builds, I could see them pathing this way, or maybe even just anointing that, because the 8% damage over time multiplier is pretty damn huge, and 30% increased physical damage. Of course, bleeding is physical damage, also pretty great. Next up, we have Efficient Explosives. It's kind of hard to categorize how good this is because I don't know exactly how much mana these new mind skills are going to reserve, but 12% is a large multiplier, if we're just looking at mana reservation in general. So I have a feeling this is going to be auto include for all non-saboteur miners and probably most saboteur miners, but I could be wrong. Don't quote me on it. Still interesting to look at. Then we have Arsonist, which is basically Righteous Fire, the node. 6% fire damage over time multiplier, huge increased fire damage, and then 1% of life regen per second. Note this is literally one travel node, although you probably aren't already there on the tree. Assuming it hasn't moved, it is still in kind of an awkward place, but not horrible. Then we have Lethality, which I kind of compared with Path of Building earlier, and I can't really see much of a difference between this right here. Maybe I'm blind or something, but it doesn't look like much has changed. Then we have Razor's Edge, which is, further trying to improve the bleeding archetype. I don't know if I want to say archetype because they haven't really gone all in on it yet, but just improve the whole dot bleeding ailment gameplay by giving us a new damage over time multiplier on it. And yeah, it always had that increased physical damage and always had that chance to bleed. So, I'm not a huge fan of ailment builds right now. Or sorry, like damaging ailment builds right now, like Ignite and Bleed, but I'm sure some people are getting ultra excited over these reveals/leaks. So next up, we have a few more notables, but this time they're not part of some large compilation JPEG type thing, so hopefully we can work through these a little bit more quickly. First up, we have Essence Extraction, which is, in my opinion, probably one of the more interesting nodes teased today, and that is some mana regen, some flask charges gained, which is a pretty large number, by the way, if you've never played Pathfinder. 15% is no joke. And then it has the mana flasks gain 1 charge every 3 seconds, and then remove a random elemental ailment from you when you use a mana flask. Both of these mods are actually so nutty for just a notable on the tree. This is definitely would be something that I think a lot of builds will consider anointing as a means of mana sustain, because mana flasks are no slouch. You can get a lot of mana back, and you can control the rate at which you get that mana. You can control, how much of it you get. You can control how many charges you have. There's a lot of cool things you can do with mana flasks, but the downside is a lot of people don't want to have to manage that. And then, of course, you're going to eventually run out during boss fights, which is just the theoretical standpoint, makes them a little bit less appealing. But I think this basically solves that, depending on how else you invest in your tree. So all around, this is probably a really interesting, strong node that's going to be considered for a lot of builds that want to invest in mana sustain via mana flasks. Here we have a node called Tranquility, and just based on how strong this is, it's pretty obvious this is going to be only anointable, but also the fact that it's clearly not anywhere on the tree. Tranquility just gives you 5% maximum energy shield, so, just a nice minor energy shield node there, and then increases and reductions to maximum energy shield will also apply to spell damage at 50% of their value. In case you're wondering, I'd say your average energy shield build that isn't investing too heavily in energy shield is going to be around 200 to 230% increased energy shield. At least that's what I've done in the past. And that's a lot of increased spell damage. If we're looking at least around 100% increased spell damage, I mean, that's an annoy I probably wouldn't even think twice about doing. I mean, for CI builds that have to stack a lot of maximum energy shield to really get the survivability they want, this is an absurd amount of spell damage. So probably one of the most overpowered looking nodes leaked today. Last Waves is a new little wheel here that gives you 30% increased area damage and then 20% increased area of effect if you're basically, a miner, more or less. So this is definitely playing off the whole cascading sequence thing because you have to have detonated recently, and the way mines are playing now, I think you're just always detonating. So yeah, this seems like basically an auto include for any AoE based miners, which is more or less all of them. But who knows how bad the travel nodes are. If they're really low, I could see people skipping this in favor of juicier crit nodes. Indomitable Army is pretty interesting. Increased maximum life, tons of physical damage reduction, tons of elemental resistances, and then moving while bleeding doesn't cause minions to take extra damage. This is very much the big tanky minion node as far as I can tell, but the way minion life sort of works is you want to just scale your gem levels very high or scale your specters very high so you have a ton of maximum life without having to invest in maximum life on the tree. And I don't know how they're reworking minions, if that's going to have to be something we need to invest in to keep our minions from dying. But I'm guessing this is going to be the kind of node that if you have to take it, you're going to feel bad about taking it. But at least it will let you play your build. So we'll have to see how things pan out for minion survivability. Destructive Apparatus is a new mine wheel here, and I'm honestly not sure how I feel about it. Obviously, 40% increased mine duration. They only have a base duration of 5 seconds now, so that's nice, I guess, for getting them all stacked up and giving yourself a little quality of life. 20% increased mine damage, okay. Mine throwing speed, okay. That sounds like a very important stat now, considering like the footage we've seen is just some guy throwing up like a goddamn machine gun. So I guess everybody's taking this in the GGG practice builds. And then each mine applies 2% reduced damage dealt to enemies near it up to 10%. This is kind of confusing because the way it's worded makes it think like that's an aura, and the auras are only going to exist when the mines have not detonated yet. So if this is going to apply up to 10% reduced damage taken or reduced damage dealt by enemies near them, but then you detonate it and it goes away, then I think this is far more useless than it looks right now. So we'll have to see how it pans out, but I think this is a pretty lackluster node. Here's another node. This is probably in my top 3 of most exciting nodes. I know I've already had top 2, but this has got to be up there somewhere. And that is thunderous salvos, which is a 30% increased critical strike chance for spells. And then skills supported by Unleash have +1 to maximum number of seals. I don't know if you guys played with Unleash yet, but I really enjoy it. I really like how it makes it so you don't have to sustain mana as much because you can only cast your spell every so often to get maximum value out of the seals. But just getting that extra spell is nutty. This is basically a more multi to anybody using Unleash the way it was designed to be used. And as you can see here, it's not attached to anything, so you're going to have to anoint this, but it's probably well worth anointing for builds that want to heavily focus on the Unleash playstyle. Yeah, really nice node, really cool node. Really odd to see a node that interacts directly with a specific support gem, but hey, I'm not complaining. Cursed Concoction is a pretty interesting node. 15% increased mana, and then 10% increased effect of your curses if you spent 200 mana recently, which is, again, just trying to sort of build in this archetype of stacking mana and being rewarded for just self-casting the shit out of your spells. And, like I said, I don't know if the whole stacking mana to deal more damage thing is going to be viable, especially after the Indigon nerf, but like being able to get increased effect of your curses can be pretty big, and that 200 mana lines up very perfectly with the the occultist notable forbidden power that gives you a power charge every time you spend 200 mana. So I don't know. That's kind of interesting to me. As far as the remove a curse when you use a mana flask node goes, that's not super exciting to me because most of the time when you're removing curses, you want to couple that with curse immunity, aka you're running a map that has, vulnerability or whatever on it, and you want to press that and you want to be able to be curse immune for like the next 6 seconds or whatever. So just removing the curse doesn't matter because it'll get reapplied to you instantly, unless this came with curse immunity, which I'm pretty sure they would include that tag if that was the case. Next up, we have Hardened Scars, and I think this node is actually deceptively bad because 15% increased life recovery from flasks, pretty okay stat. Honestly, a very good stat if you rely on flasks as much as you can in this game. And Fortify during effect of any life flask. I'm sorry. I mean, I know you can kind of manipulate your life flasks in such a way so that it's applied more often than maybe they normally would be. AK, like have them give you a low, like higher amount of life, but then give it like a lower recovery rate or something. So that way you have this fortify effect almost permanently as long as you're missing some life. But I mean, the second you get topped off, your life flask effect is going to end, your fortify is going to end, you're going to get one shot. And then I think the real kicker here is getting fortify right now is so dead easy on so many different builds. Like even shield charges, you can now shield charge with wands, so there's almost no excuse not to shield charge if you're playing a caster, and then you link your shield charge with fortify, and you're getting fortify. And then of course all melee builds can very easily fit fortify or use a pseudo 7 link fortify sword or something. So I think this is probably one of the worst nodes revealed today if I had to pick. Okay, now we're going to take a look at some ascendancy leaks. This is probably the most in-depth part of the video, and I know it's kind of ridiculous because we're probably pushing like 20 minutes already, but I'm going to try to go and dig deep on these because a lot of them are really interesting and are going to fundamentally shape how we pick our starter builds. So first we have the necromancer ascendant. Now you'll see how these kind of line up better when we get to the necromancer near the end of the video. But basically, what they've changed is instead of getting the offering skills affecting you at 50% reduced effect, now it's 25 reduced effect, just straight buff there. Minions dealing 30% increased damage, just how it is. Auras from your skills grant 2% attack and cast speed. That's actually a nerf. It was 3% attack and cast speed. Now it's down to 2%. But then you have this, if you've consumed a corpse recently, your minions have 30% increased area of effect. That tag didn't exist before, but that's a huge deal for any minion doing AoE attacks or whatever, aka zombies slamming, specters spamming their little lightning thing. I forget what that's called, but the thing that people memed with Pledge of Hands this league, that's going to affect that. So all in all, just kind of changing it a little bit to better fit the current theme of the necromancer. No crazy buffs really, aside from the offering thing. Next, we have the new Assassin Ascendant, and it looks like they just reworked it ever so slightly to better match the upcoming Assassin rework, and I'll get to that in a second, but basically it lost 0.25% of critical strike chance, which is I mean, I guess that's kind of a big deal considering it was only 1% to begin with, and losing 25% of that is no bueno, but it still retains its power charge generation, its huge chance to poison on hit, its reflect immunity to critical strikes, and then this new 10% chance to gain elusive on kill. Elusive is a buff that gives you 40% movement speed and 20% spell and attack dodge, but it decays over time. And more importantly, you can't actually overwrite your elusive buff with a new instance of elusive if you already have it, unless there's some specific interactions. Like I think they mentioned Withering Step, the upcoming gem, is going to be able to overwrite those in a way. But generally speaking, you can't just have 100% uptime on elusive, especially not at its highest capacity, because its effectiveness depreciates over time. So you're eventually going to go down to, 5% movement speed, 2% chance to dodge or whatever. So this looks like a fine rework, I guess. Maybe they think elusive is really damn strong, which is why they nerfed the crit a little bit to compensate. Or, in all likelihood, they just want to push people towards the assassin rework. So yeah, let's take a look at that now. Okay, so before I start talking about the Assassin rework, I just want to say that I'm getting major Slayer 3.7 vibes from this rework. Like, there's just so many new tools that have been jam-packed in this Ascendancy. I would not be surprised if this becomes the flavor of the month Ascendancy, especially if Poison is as powerful as, I think it's going to be. First up, we have Toxic Delivery and Noxious Strike. I won't go too in-depth in here, but all you need to know is they've kind of just buffed both of these nodes and moved them around a little bit. They moved the life recovery over to Noxious Strike, so you can take it for early sustain. They moved the plus to critical strike chance on per poison affecting the enemy. They moved that up to Toxic Delivery. They buffed Toxic Delivery to 50% more damage for crit strike poisons versus 30%. And then Noxious Strike got hella multipliers. It got this 25% to damage over time multiplier with poison and a 50% increased damage with poison. So both of these very nutty and auto includes for poison assassin builds. Ambush and Assassinate didn't actually get changed that much, but it used to be 30% increased damage with hits against enemies that are low life. Now it's 20% more damage with hits against enemies that are low life. Then we have Opportunistic, which was kind of interesting because it gave you 100% increased damage against rare and unique enemies, aka bosses, when they're all alone. And they actually changed that to 20% more damage. Now, I think this is most of the time going to be a buff, but in some cases where you're just stacking a lot of crit and you're actually not stacking a lot of increased modifiers, the 100% increased modifier probably would win out. So cast on crit builds comes to mind, and that's like basically all I play when I play assassin. So yeah, 20% more damage is always welcome, but I think in some niche cases, the 100% increased damage that used to be there will be missed. Then there's also the little, well, at least 2 rare or unique enemies are nearby. You take 10% reduced damage. This is hard to tell how good this is going to be because we don't know what the range is basically really the only deciding factor. And then if you're mapping very fast, you're killing things really quickly. But then again, if they're dead, they can't deal damage to you. So that's also damage reduction right there. Either way, this is probably going to be a very good defensive utility with good uptime, but it's, again, hard to tell without knowing what the range is because nearby is, of course, a very flexible wording for GGG. Next, we have Mistwalker. I'm really excited for this node. It's basically 20% increased attack and cast speed while elusive, so you're going to have that up all the time. 8% damage reduction while elusive, up all the time. Increased effective elusive, that makes it last a little longer and makes it give you a little bit more movement speed and dodge. Of course, this is a little bit different. I can't say this will be up all the time because that's not really how elusive works. And then chance to gain an elusive on critical strike is, of course, the reason why I'm saying it's going to be up all the time because you're always going to be critting. You're always going to be getting elusive back the second you lose it. And then take no extra damage from crits while elusive. This is cool because this doesn't depend on the effect of elusive, just like the attack speed and reduced damage taken. You're literally just, you can't get crit basically while you're elusive, which is really cool because there's rippy map mods that you might think twice about running, and now you definitely won't. Then Unstable Infusion they moved the maximum power charges over to that, so it basically feels better to take early on, which is awesome because currently it feels really shitty to take Unstable Infusion because all you get is power charge generation, which is like nothing. It's really not exciting as far as ascendancy nodes go, but now it has the maximum power charge without having to wait for the next lab. And then Deadly Infusion now gets 10% increased movement speed at maximum power charges. So yeah, all around, I mean, this ascendancy already had a ton of damage. It has even more damage, and it has utility. It has defensive tools. It has zippiness. Everything about this assassin kind of just feels like new Trickster to me. It really just gives me all the things that I like about Trickster, but better. So yeah, I really look forward to playing this one. Definitely going to have to try a few poison builds. Next up, on the topic of ascendancies that did not get reworked in a way that I'm really excited about, we have Saboteur. I'm hoping these leaks are not 100% accurate because right now these buffs, quote unquote, are not really proving to be all that great in my opinion, but we'll still take a look at them. We have Explosive Expert, which is a huge damage node if you can manage to inflict all 3 ailments regularly. Huge crit multi, huge crit strike chance, pretty big elemental penetration, but you have to be inflicting those ailments. So, not a horrible node, but it's going to be kind of tricky to consistently shock and chill most bosses, especially if you're doing some weird like tri-element trapper minor build. Increased area of effect up to 30%. It's nice, just a little bit more area. Reduced damage taken from area hits. I did not read that correctly, but you know what I mean. That's better than the reduced damage taken from trap and mines. That's a little bit better. Then they have Pyromaniac, which was very frustrating because it was one of my favorite nodes for the Saboteur. Huge regen. Used to be 10% or used to be 20% regen basically. Now it's 10% regen, so they just cut that in half, and then they changed the mana cost for traps down to 20%, so they just nerfed that. Kind of needlessly, I guess, in my opinion, but whatever. And then they have 15% reduced mana reservation for skills that throw mines. Again, it's hard for me to really pinpoint because I don't really know how the mechanics of the mana reservation is going to look at its very core. But basically, I'm going to guess if you couple this with the new 12% reduced mana reservation from skills that throw mines notable that we looked at earlier, I'm guessing you're going to have very cheap and spammable mines. So this is probably still an auto-include, even though they cut the regen in half. Then you have Bomb Specialist. This is still kind of the same thing as before, increased mine lane speed, but now it's increased mine throwing speed, and then detonation speed, and then area of effect for each mine. So this is really just the quality of life node. It sort of always was, but they did move the AoE from Demolition Specialist over to Bomb Specialist. So You can take this pretty early while leveling. I'll still probably take Pyromaniac. It's just too good. And then Detonation Specialist, or I'm sorry, Demolitions Specialist is actually pretty different because now mines grant aura effect. That's just sort of how they work. And or they grant auras. That's how they work. And now they're going to give 100% increased aura effect. So it's going to depend on how good the auras are. But something tells me it's going to be pretty damn good. It's going to be a lot of damage with some of the different auras we've seen. They cause nearby enemies to take increased damage. And there's also this line about hindering enemies for 2 seconds, reducing their movement speed by 40%. I'm guessing that's not considered a aura effect that will scale with this. But even if it's just a flat 40%, I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. That's a really nice line for defensive utility. And then it looks like Born in the Shadows wasn't changed at all, which is kind of just a thank God moment. Maybe I can still play miners because that was like one of my favorite nodes. One of my favorite ascendancy nodes, period. So all in all, it seems like they just sort of changed miners. It looks like they kind of nerfed them a little bit across the board if I had to pick, especially with like the Pyromaniac change is such a question mark in my mind. But yeah, overall, it's still hard for me to make any judgments about miners because they've been changed so much mechanically, but I'll probably still try one out this league or, watch some videos of people one-shotting Shaper with it or whatever. So fingers crossed this is better than it looks. And last but not least, we have the Necromancer leak. So I'm just going to try to go one by one here. There's a lot of interesting stuff, but at the same time, Necromancer has kind of lost a little bit of its minion-specific flavor. And they did mention that they're moving a lot of the Necromancer goodies onto the skill gems themselves. So hopefully, for all of you that are crying out that Spectre's lost, all that damage in life, or that your warrior skeletons are now going to be able to miss unless you build accuracy on them, then I think we might want to wait for the gem reveals before you get too upset about this. That being said, let's talk about some of these. First up, we have Mindless Aggression. This is basically just a travel node you're going to have to take to get either of the really cool, interesting new nodes, Bone Barrier and Unnatural Strength. And that is huge movement speed, big damage, and then big attack and cast speed for your minions. I mean, just the 30% movement speed alone makes this interesting for me, even though it does kind of feel like a pretty simple ascendancy node. It's still cool to get 30% movement speed on minions. Like, slow minions suck. Fast minions are very fun. Auras from your skills grant 3% increased attack and cast speed. That was already a thing. And let me just double check here. I'm going to take a look at my Necromancer I have here, but I think that's mostly the same. Yeah, that's literally the same. Okay, so Commander of Darkness hasn't changed at all. Unnatural Strength, which is gated behind Mindless Aggression, just 2 level to all minion skill gems. I kind of wish this was more interesting than it is, but it's probably still really goddamn strong because they've changed how minion skill gems work in terms of their internal scaling. It was always very good to stack gem levels on most minions, but this is a huge deal. So hopefully there's not going to be so many sources of plus level to minion skill gems that we can hit like level 30 gems and start pushing the soft cap on gem scaling. So this is actually worth taking, but it's still interesting to look at and definitely going to be an option I will consider for my pure carrion golem build that I'm definitely going to make at some point. Next up, we have Essence Glutton. This is actually a little bit more interesting. It's a nice little chunk of ES regen, mana regen, when you consume corpses or have nearby corpses. And it's like basically up to, 4% over 1 second. It's basically like 6% ES regen under optimal circumstances, and then 4% plus 50 per second for mana regen. I'm not sure what build is going to need this, but this is a lot of mana and ES regen. And I think the ES regen wouldn't be super noticeable for a, Energy Shield CI low life type build or whatever, but I think it would be very noticeable for Eldritch Battery builds. We have Mistress of Sacrifice, which was already a very popular node for necromancers, but now instead of having 50% reduced effect, it's 25% reduced effect on you, which is really cool because there was already the Queen's Hunger, I think it's called, the unique chest that drops from the Mastermind encounter, and that's actually gives 25% as well. And I always thought it was kind of odd that shitty unique item had a better reduced effect than the actual Necromancer Ascendancy, so that's cool. Then we have Plaguebringer, which is just you know, some nice area of effect, some more multis here, and then a nice little reduced damage taken, kind of a quality of life node. But the real exciting thing is the next node behind it, which is corpse pack, which is packed. Sorry, 30% increased damage if you've consumed a corpse recently, and then 2% increased cast speed and attack speed for each corpse consumed recently. That's gonna, I mean, it's not so much the increased damage yourself. I don't think that's super exciting, but the fact that you get more cast speed for consuming corpses and attack speed is gonna make clearing feel much faster and smoother. And then more importantly, you have these two interesting numbers here, which are the enemies near your corpses spawned recently are chilled and shocked. So that's basically a little more multi there with the shock, and then a little bit of defense from the chill. And then increased maximum life of corpses you spawn. I mean, they're just pushing the whole, you know, volatile dead, you know, detonate dead, cremation archetype. And I hate to use the word archetype because it's not real support for it, but this is like the exact sort of stat line you're looking for. And of course, the stats before it here that say, you know, you can get more damage for being near corpses. You can get increased area of effect for consuming corpses. Yeah, I mean, honestly, these are fantastic stat lines if you're just playing like self-cast Detonate Dead or some shit. Then you have Bone Armor, which is the next one coming up after Mindless Aggression. And you choose between this and Unnatural Strength, I guess. I guess you could take both. Who am I kidding? It's going to depend a lot. And it has a couple of stat lines here. It says, grants level 1 Bone Armor skill. And I'm not sure if the Bone Armor is actually just its own thing or if those next 3 stat lines are from Bone Armor, but I'm guessing it's something else. So we don't actually know what Bone Armor does. But we also get some additional fizz reduction, some elemental res, and then some life and energy shield recovery rate up to 30%. All of those stats are fantastic. 10% physical damage reduction, huge. Elemental resistances per minion, not that huge. And then life recovery rate is fantastic because you're getting a lot of regen from other sources in this ascendancy, and then sometimes you just have regen from things like soul rest or whatever. So getting that life recovery rate is going to make it feel that much stronger. And then minions have 20% more life. I mean, not much else to say there. Going to make your minions way tankier. Or if you're doing some like weird unearth build, because it seems like there's a ton of support for unearth, detonate dead, volatile dead memes. All in all, it's kind of hard to really make a decision on how I feel about this Ascendancy leak. I kind of feel like Necro's lost a lot of its flavor, but at the same time, it got so many interesting, different quality of life options, and the Mistress of Sacrifice buff means you can get, you know, max block even more easily on your necromancers. So I'm excited to play with this. I was hoping for some weird golem nodes, but I guess that's Unnatural Strength or like maybe Elementalist's niche. Yeah, well, that's all I have to say. Hey guys, thank you for sticking around to the end of the video, especially this absurdly long one. Oh, and I'm losing my voice a little bit, but before that happens, let me really quick thank my awesome Patreon supporters, Real Human, Zikarak, Squally, Zoljan, Coda, Julia, Allen, Kepler, Sparky Kata, Fusk, Putzak, Heiser801, Olivier, Ice Dude, Ginzink, Anonymous, and Orangina. You guys are awesome. You make what I do possible. Really appreciate it. And keep an eye out for my League Starter videos. As soon as patch notes drop, you know, I'll get to work on them, and they should be out within the next day or two. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.